presentation. My name is Austin Stewart. I am part of Group 7. This presentation will examine harmful algal blooms in Virginia through a One Health framework emphasizing the interconnected impacts on environmental, animal, and human health, using current patterns observed in Virginia's rivers and the Chesapeake Bay. We evaluate key drivers, major bloom-forming species, and the impact for ecological and public health systems. Increasingly common across Virginia's rivers and estuaries. As environmental conditions shift, rising water temperatures, nutrient enrichment, and expanding urban runoff create favorable conditions that allow blooms to form and persist. Two species we will discuss are central contributors to toxin production and ecological disruption in these systems. This presentation examines how those blooms develop, why they are intensifying, and the consequences they pose for local ecosystems and communities. To understand the scale of these impacts, we first need to define what harmful algal blooms are and how they function within aquatic environments. When phytoplankton proliferate beyond normal levels in response to elevated water temperatures and excess nutrient availability. Excess nitrogen and phosphorus accelerate this growth and allow toxin-producing species to expand quickly. These blooms often alter water color, appearing red, brown, or green. The toxins released can harm fish, shellfish, wildlife, pets, and humans. As blooms intensify, they reduce dissolved oxygen and create ecological dead zones that diminish biodiversity and lead to widespread mortality events. Activity is driven largely by two toxin-producing phytoplankton species with distinct ecological roles. Carlodinium veneficum produce potent carlotoxins that damage gill tissues and impair fish respiration, leading to rapid mortality. This species flourishes in nutrient-enriched stratified tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay, which are elevated nitrogen levels, create ideal conditions for bloom development. As a result, K. veneficum is frequently linked to sudden, localized fish kill events. Polycrichides, a dinoflagellate responsible for harmful red tide events, presents additional challenges. It generates toxins that accumulate in shellfish, posing risk to seafood safety and public health. Blooms of this species often can produce water discoloration that reduces light penetration and alters aquatic habitat conditions. M. polycrichides can also produce reactive oxygen species, adding further physiological stress to marine organisms. Nutrient enrichment and shifting environmental conditions support the emergence of harmful blooms in Virginia's coastal and estuarine ecosystems. Understanding the biology of these species sets the foundation for examining the broader environmental and human-driven forces that enable harmful algal blooms to form and intensify.
Okay. Hi guys, so I'm here to present slide 5, and these are just talking about the effects of the algal blooms and what drives them. So harmful algal blooms in Virginia are largely driven by human activities and climate change, which increase nutrient pollution and create warmer, more favorable conditions for algae to grow. And that is from Virginia and West Virginia Water Science 2023. So the things that come into play about this are climate change, as we just said, wastewater and septic leakage, coastal development, agricultural runoff, urban stormwater runoff, and more frequent extreme weather. And this also just comes into play with, the things that we do, such as like driving, that add to the pollution that also leads to climate change. And one reference that I found for this is on Google Scholar, and it's called Harmful Algae. The tide turns episodic and localized cross-contamination in California coastline with, not that one. I gotta do this again. Hi guys, my name is Kamari, and I'm here to share slide 5. And this slide here just talks about the things that drive you know, algal blooms in Virginia. So the slide says environmental drivers of HABs. Harmful algal blooms are in Virginia are largely driven by human activities and climate change, which increase nutrient pollution and create warmer, more favorable conditions for algae to grow. Um, these factors, like I was stated before, climate change, wastewater and septic leakage, coastal development, agricultural runoff, urban stormwater runoff, and more frequent extreme weather. This also comes into play with, how do we treat our earth, the things that we bring into play, like air pollution, that all starts to drive the state of climate change. And I feel like that is very important to consider when we think of why are these algal blooms growing? Why are they multiplying so fast? There should be things that we should put in place in order to, get this problem under control.
This slide focuses on One Health, which means the health of the people, animals, and environments are all connected. Harmful algae blooms are a good example of why this approach matters. Because when water is affected, everything that depends on that water is impacted too. We'll start with environmental health. When algae grows too fast, it reduces water quality, and blooms can block sunlight and decrease oxygen in the water and create dead zones where fish and plants can't survive. Over time, this leads to economic damage and loss of biodiversity. Next is animal health. Fish, shellfish, and other aquatic animals can absorb toxins directly from the water. Because of this, seafood can become unsafe to eat. Wildlife and pets also can get sick if they drink or swim from contaminated waters. Finally, harmful algae blooms affect human health. People can get sick from eating contaminated seafood or touching or breathing in droplets from polluted waters. Symptoms can include irritated skin, stomach problems, and trouble breathing. Communities that rely on fishing, recreation, and tourism can also suffer economic problems when waterways are closed. The idea of this slide is that everything is linked together. Protecting the water quality doesn't just help the environment, it helps the animal and the people using it too. Using one health approach can lead to better politics, better monitoring, and better and healthier communities.
Algal blooms can seriously affect animal health. The toxins they produce, especially carlotoxins, can damage fish gills. This is why we often see fish kills during bloom events. Shellfish, like oysters and clams, also are affected. Because they filter a lot of water, they end up holding these toxins even if they do not appear sick. The toxins then move through the food chain, including birds and marine mammals, which obtain it by eating contaminated fish, which causes illness. Pets, especially dogs, are also at risk if they swim in or drink contaminated water. All of this creates stress on the whole ecosystem and disrupts the normal food webs. All these problems don't just affect animals, they also impact people and communities, which leads to human health and economic effects. Harmful algal blooms also affect human health. People who eat contaminated seafood can become sick, which causes stomach issues, nerve problems, or breathing problems. Recreational exposure is also a concern. Swimming or boating in bloom-affected water can cause skin rashes, burning eyes, coughing, and throat irritation. Aerosolized toxins in the air can also cause breathing issues. There are economic impacts too. Fisheries and shellfish industries lose money when waters have to close. Tourism goes down when beaches shut down or when water quality is poor. These effects are even harder on vulnerable groups like children, older adults, people with chronic illness, and communities that depend on fishing or coastal work. So overall, HABs create both health and economic challenges for many people.
To regularly check rivers, lakes, and the Chesapeake Bay tributaries to see if blooms are forming or spreading. And so one of their main function is to collect water samples and to run lab tests to confirm which algal species are present and whether toxin levels are high enough to be harmful. Now, when do they find something, they what they do is that they issue public advisories, they close these affected areas, and release health warnings so that people would know to avoid these waters. Now, this whole process is supported by partners like NOAA and the Department of Environmental Quality, which helps the state track conditions in real time and be able to respond faster. And so that is the main monitoring and how Virginia responds when it comes to these issues. So continuing, when it comes to the gaps and the current challenges that Virginia faces when it comes to these issues, and even with the fact that there are a strong system in place, there are still some gaps. So the big issue is that many people simply don't know about HAB and they don't pay attention to the advisories, so exposures still happens. Now, long-term monitoring is also limited in some smaller waterways, which means these algal blooms can go unnoticed for months, for longer periods, and on top of that, the toxin test results sometimes take time to come back, which also causes delays when promulgating warnings and public education. And of course, one of the major thing that we need to focus and current challenges is the nutrient pollution that continues to be spread. And when we talk about nutrient pollution, these are the fertilizers, these are the runoff and the wastewater that is being used to feed the blooms. And because of all of this, increasing community engagement and education is really important moving forward. Now, to help reduce the impact of HSBs, there are three major strategies that we can focus on. So the first one is especially strengthening monitoring and early warning systems. What does this mean? Expanding the statewide surveillance and improving how quickly advisories are released so people get the information in real time. And these are very important to consider expanding technological advancements by using aerial monitoring and even aquatic monitoring so that we could see how wide, how big the exposures are when it comes to HABs. Now, second thing, to prevent and mitigate the growth of and the impact of HSBs is we need to reduce the nutrient pollution at its root. That includes better controls on our agricultural runoff, the urban runoff, and even the stormwater systems. Another strategy here is the restoration of our watersheds and improving land use so that we can prevent these nutrients from flowing into the water in the first place. Why? Because the nutrient pollution is what feeds the HSBs to grow and into a state of where it's uncontrollable. So that's the second thing that we need to focus is to reduce this nutrient pollution. And third, we really do need to increase public awareness and collaboration. So we have to think about education, the signages, and even the outreaches. And these things, when we put them together, can make a big difference in helping people understand the risk. And that's why we will be using a One Health approach that encourages all these agencies and local partners to work together for a more effective response. Why? Because knowledge is power. If the public and the community is made aware of the issue that is ongoing and how to mitigate and how to prevent these things, we are able to create that One Health approach where in all areas with human health, animal health, and environmental health, we are able to mitigate and prevent the blooms of harmful algals. And so, to wrap up everything, harmful algal blooms are becoming more common in Virginia, primarily because of climate change and nutrient pollution. Now, these blooms don't just affect the water, they have a long-lasting impact on environmental health, animal health, and human health, not just individually, but all at once. That is why the One Health perspective is very important. Why? Because it helps us understand how all these areas are connected. So moving forward, we need to have a stronger monitoring. We are to reduce nutrient pollution and improve public education, and this will be the keys to protect our communities and ecosystem from the harmful algal blooms. And so again, we are Group 7, and thank you for listening.